This is the way that she would not have wanted it to retire. A quiet thank you from her supervisor and a cliche gold watch. She'd been a valued employee for 35 plus years at the same company. She'd given her all to her career, and was time to pass the torch to new blood, younger blood, more eager, have more energy than she had. As much influence she had in the company, she should have had a bigger and more extravagant celebration in a much bigger venue. But times were hard. Money was short supply nowadays, so the quieter appreciation by a few was what she was given. All she said was she was relieved that it turned out the way it did. She was a quiet by nature, a person who put her head down and worked tirelessly without complaint. She didn't like to be the center of attention, but liked to work in the background. This appreciation ceremony, if you call it that, was exactly what she wanted and needed. She found self-satisfaction in what she did. It did not need much accolades, but it was grateful when it did happen. She had been able to make some needed changes in the company over the years. She did make a bigger impact than she thought. Let's see. What happens in this triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem? And the second gospel lesson is questioning of Pilate and the death of Jesus. Okay. After he came in riding a donkey, the palms, the robes, and the celebration for Jesus, Jesus cleanses the temple. Jesus curses the fig tree. The authority of Jesus is questioned. The parable of two sons, the parable of the wicked tenants, the parable of the wedding banquet, the question about paying taxes, the question about resurrection, the greatest commandment, the question about David's son. Jesus denounces scribes and Pharisees, the lament over Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple foretold, signs of the end of the age, persecutions foretold, desolating sacrilege, the coming of the Son of Man, the lessons of the fig tree, the necessity for watchfulness, the faithful and unfaithful slave, the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, the parable of the talents, the judgment of the nations, the plot to kill Jesus, the anointing at Bethany. Judas agrees to betray Jesus, the Passover with the disciples, the institution of the Lord's Supper, Peter's denial foretold, Jesus prays at Gethsemane, and the betrayal and arrest of Jesus. As you can see, Jesus' triumphal into Jerusalem was only the start of things. He was very busy while his time was in Jerusalem between his entry and his crucifixion. He had things to do. He spared nothing. It's like he came in with something to get off his chest. His last hurrah, what he needed to do to talk to the people of Jerusalem, to point out to the scribes and Pharisees and the elders and chief priests that they needed to change their direction and do it now. But as it happened, maybe it was too much truth all at once. We can only take so much. We need a breather between to let things sink in. And Jesus was just tireless in teaching the people and pointing out what needed to be done. And his disciples, I imagine, stood there in awe, not believing what they saw and heard from this Jesus. They just thought it was his time to come to Jerusalem and be killed because that's what Jesus told them was going to happen. I imagine they didn't expect this at all. But it's like anybody else who had their last hurrah. You need to say a few things to get things straight, just to say them. Maybe people will pay attention. Maybe they won't, but maybe some will. Maybe someone will take it to heart what he has to say. I'm thinking, too, about his triumphal entrance into Jerusalem as king. Well, I imagine the king would come. If you've seen Aladdin, the movie, you've seen them coming in with the jugglers and the dancers and the gold and the elephants and the whole 9 yards with the brass playing and the dancing and all this kind of thing. That's what a king deserves. Well, not in this case. Jesus wasn't that kind of a king. A donkey and a colt with a few coats and a few palms, with people around that probably some knew him and some were just whipped up into the crowd because there was a crowd gathering and they wanted to see what was going on. But they weren't the crowd who were welcoming the real king of Jerusalem. He's not kingly in any kind of normal sense of what a king is. I mean, he cared about people. He didn't care about just keeping power up in the structures on top. He was with the people. He wanted to speak to people's hearts to make a difference in a small way. And that's how he operated as his king. He did have crowds that he taught, and he made a difference that way. I'm sure he raised a few eyebrows when he upturned tables in the temple. But it was different. He cared about people in a different kind of a way than what they were used to as a king. The good news was, and still is, that Jesus is concerned about everyone, no matter how different we are from each other or from the norm. He took into account people's hearts. He took into account that we're all created creatures of God, sons and daughters to be cared for, to be nurtured, trying to make changes in our hearts, maybe in subtle ways, over a long period of time, oftentimes. Jesus was, in effect, the king who was the king of hearts, if you want to call it that. He didn't need the celebration. He didn't need the accolades, and I'm sure he would have not wanted the elephants and the brass players and the dancers. That was just not who he was. True to who Jesus was, the son of a carpenter who washed the feet and healed the lepers and the lame and the blind and talked to women and all those kinds of things. That was his way, not the typical king. And so with Palm Sunday, we look at the palms and we think about this kind of kingship. Those palms that were used for many different things back then, and even now for many things too. Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem is Jesus' triumphal entry into our hearts, as he is with the people. Not even a wink or a glimpse of what's going to happen. That wasn't the present moment. He went on to his ministry in Jerusalem as King of people's hearts to make change. And he has. He continues to do so in our hearts, even to this day. We celebrate these times and days when Jesus is in the midst of us, sharing himself with us as King. Amen.